The relationship between the United States and Iran is one of the most complex and conflict-ridden on the planet. The U.S. is a global superpower with over 340 million people, while Iran is a major regional player with more than 90 million. Together, they make up roughly 4.2% and 1.1% of the world's population. It's been 45 years since the two countries last had diplomatic relations, and several times they've come dangerously close to war. In early 2020, a clash seemed almost inevitable. The U.S. launched a drone strike in Baghdad, killing Iranian Major General Qasem Soleimani, one of the most powerful men in Iran. The response was immediate. Tehran fired dozens of missiles at U.S. bases in Iraq. The world froze. Had the escalation gone any further, it could have turned into the largest armed conflict since World War II. For a moment, both sides stepped back, and war was averted. But the tension never disappeared. By spring 2020, U.S. bases in Iraq were once again under rocket fire, and from 2021 to 2024, the U.S. and Iran continued trading blows through proxy forces across the Middle East. The situation peaked in 2025. In June, the U.S. carried out an unprecedented operation. Airstrikes and cruise missiles hit 3 of Iran's key nuclear facilities: Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. Washington openly declared the move was meant to prevent Tehran from getting closer to building a nuclear weapon. Iran's response came fast. On June 23rd, Iranian forces launched a missile strike on Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the largest U.S. stronghold in the region. Once again, the world found itself on the brink of a major war. But just like 5 years earlier, both sides pulled back at the last moment. The U.S. and Iran keep trading strikes, threats, and sanctions, yet each time it feels like a game of chess played on the edge of a cliff, where one wrong move could turn a regional crisis into a global catastrophe. To understand why the situation has grown so tense and why it could easily happen again, we need to go back to the very beginning of this rivalry, long before World War II. In the early 20th century, the British discovered oil in the Iranian deserts. It soon became clear that Iran had the 4th largest proven reserves in the world, a potential energy superpower. The problem for London was that these oil fields were inside an independent Iran, beyond the reach of the British Empire. Britain negotiated a profit-sharing deal and formed the Anglo-Iranian Oil Company, but the terms were one-sided. Iran received just 16% of the profits, while 84% went to the British. By the start of World War II, the company controlled all Iranian oil and had become the empire's largest enterprise. Inside Iran, resentment grew. And in 1941, when Germany invaded the USSR, Iran's strategic location on the Soviet Union's southern flank became critical. Though officially neutral, Iran was seen by the Allies as too friendly toward Berlin. A potential alliance between Iran and Nazi Germany posed a real threat, a new front for the USSR, danger to Caucasian oil fields, and the risk of losing Britain's main oil supplier to the enemy. To remove that risk and open a supply corridor to the USSR, Britain and the Soviet Union invaded Iran. The country had no chance to resist and surrendered within days. The old Shah was forced out, replaced by his 21-year-old son Mohammad Reza Pahlavi, someone the Allies found easier to work with. During the war, Iran was effectively under Allied control. Tens of thousands of Americans were stationed there, and nearly a third of all U.S. supplies to the USSR moved through Iranian territory. After the war, occupation forces withdrew, but the question of unfair oil contracts remained. By the early 1950s, Britain was still taking the lion's share of profits. Iranian oil workers lived in poverty, and London refused to open the company's books. The idea of nationalizing oil gained massive support. In 1951, Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, backed unanimously by Parliament, made it law. Britain hit back immediately with an oil embargo. In 1953, MI6 and the CIA organized a coup that overthrew Mossadegh's government. Hundreds were killed. Mossadegh was placed under house arrest for life, and the Shah's power was greatly expanded, essentially as a Western-approved autocrat. For many Iranians, he became a symbol of foreign control. During the Cold War, Iran's oil wealth, strategic location, and pro-Western ruler made it a valuable U.S. partner. The Shah aligned closely with Washington and Jerusalem, and for decades Iran was one of America's key allies in the Middle East. But inside the country, anger was boiling. The secret police crushed dissent. Thousands were arrested, and leaders, including Ayatollah Khomeini, were exiled. Reports of torture spread. The Communist Party was banned. Meanwhile, the Shah's modernization and secular reforms, including expanded rights for women, alienated both the left and the conservative clergy. By the late 1970s, the country erupted in mass protests. A cinema fire in Abadan, shootings of demonstrators in Tehran, and nationwide rallies of millions. When army units began defecting to the protesters, the Shah fled Iran in early 1979. A new radical Shiite regime abolished the monarchy and brought Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini back from 15 years of exile as supreme leader. The Islamic Republic of Iran was born, a theocracy fiercely hostile to the US and Israel. Purges and executions of former officials followed immediately. For Washington, it was a shock. A longtime ally had overnight become an adversary. When the US accepted the Shah for medical treatment, Iran demanded his extradition, a certain death sentence. Washington refused. Haunted by memories of Western-backed coups, Iranian students believed another plot was brewing inside the US embassy. In November 1979, they stormed the compound and took 52 hostages. Months of negotiations failed. A rescue attempt, Operation Eagle Claw, ended in disaster. 8 American servicemen died before even reaching Tehran. The US cut diplomatic ties with Iran, and they've never been restored. In September 1980, Iraq's Saddam Hussein launched a full-scale invasion. Before the revolution, Baghdad stood no chance against Iran's strong military and US backing. But after the purges, Iran was weakened, and Saddam saw his moment. The war dragged on for 8 years, turning into a brutal stalemate reminiscent of World War I. Iran released the American hostages after 444 days. The US imposed harsh sanctions and armed Iraq, hoping to bleed Iran further. Hundreds of thousands of Iranians died, and Iraq used chemical weapons on the battlefield. According to Washington, Lebanon's Hezbollah, backed by Iran, carried out multiple attacks on US targets. In 1983, a bombing of the US embassy in Beirut killed 17 Americans. Later that year, a suicide truck bomb destroyed barracks, killing 241 US and 58 French troops. In 1984, Iran was labeled a state sponsor of terrorism. When Iran mined the Persian Gulf in 1988 and a US frigate hit one, America launched Operation Praying Mantis, the largest US naval battle since World War II, destroying oil platforms and crippling much of Iran's fleet. Just 3 months later, a US cruiser entered Iranian waters and mistakenly shot down Iran Air Flight 655, a civilian airliner from Tehran to Dubai, killing all 290 people on board. It was one of the worst civilian aviation disasters caused by military error, second only to MH17. Hostility deepened. Each side saw itself as the aggrieved victim. In 1995, the US imposed a total embargo on trade with Iran. A year later, a Hezbollah bombing in Saudi Arabia killed 19 US airmen. After 9/11, President George W. Bush branded Iran, Iraq, and North Korea as the axis of evil. In 2003, the US invaded Iraq under the pretext of WMDs and toppled Saddam within weeks. No weapons were ever found. The message to Tehran and Pyongyang was clear: get a nuclear deterrent or risk being next. North Korea tested a bomb in 2006. Iran accelerated its program. Washington insisted a nuclear-armed Iran was unacceptable and alternated between sanctions and negotiations. In 2015, under President Obama, the US and Iran signed the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action, JCPOA. America eased sanctions in exchange for Iran, limiting its nuclear work and allowing inspections. It was a cautious step toward thawing relations. Then Donald Trump took office in 2016, vowing to rip up the deal. In 2018, he did just that. Sanctions snapped back, and Iran threatened to restart its program and even block the Strait of Hormuz, a move that could cripple global oil trade. In spring and summer 2019, several oil tankers were damaged in the Persian Gulf. Western countries blamed Iran, which denied it. Tehran shot down a U.S. drone over the Strait of Hormuz. In July, Britain seized an Iranian tanker off Gibraltar, accusing it of violating EU sanctions by shipping oil to Syria. Iran responded by capturing a British tanker in the Gulf. Both sides eventually released the ships and crews, but the region was already on edge. On December 27, 2019, a rocket attack on Iraq's K-1 base killed a U.S. contractor and wounded 4 troops. Washington blamed Iran-backed Shiite militias, though Tehran and Hezbollah denied it. At the time, around 5,000 U.S. soldiers were stationed in Iraq. 2 days later, U.S. airstrikes hit the group's facilities in Iraq and Syria, killing dozens. By New Year's Eve, Iranian-aligned militiamen stormed the U.S. embassy in Baghdad. No one was killed, but the siege was a warning. On January 3, 2020, a U.S. drone strike killed Qasem Soleimani outside Baghdad airport. The operation was personally approved by President Trump and marked the first time since World War II that Washington had deliberately assassinated a senior military leader of another nation, often compared to the killing of Japanese Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto. Iran declared it was no longer bound by the nuclear deal and demanded U.S. forces withdraw from Iraq. On January 8th, Iran launched Operation Martyr Soleimani, firing ballistic missiles at 2 U.S. bases in Iraq. By then, the U.S. had already deployed reinforcements to the region. Miraculously, there were no casualties, only damage to facilities. This allowed both sides to de-escalate without losing face. Tehran showed strength. Washington avoided a full-scale war. But tragedy still struck. On high alert for a potential U.S. strike, Iran's air defenses mistook a radar signal for a cruise missile and fired 2 surface-to-air missiles. The target turned out to be Ukraine International Airlines Flight 752, a passenger jet leaving Tehran for Kyiv. All 176 aboard died. Many were Iranian and Canadian citizens. Initially, the government blamed technical failure and blocked investigators, but later admitted to the mistaken launch. The cover-up attempt sparked nationwide protests. War with the U.S. was avoided, but 2020 still took innocent lives and reminded everyone how close disaster had come. 2 months later, new violence erupted in Iraq. On March 11th and 14th, rockets struck Camp Taji, a coalition base near Baghdad, killing several troops and injuring many more. The U.S. and U.K. retaliated with airstrikes on Iran-backed militia sites. Baghdad accused its Western allies of escalating the conflict and violating sovereignty. Tehran condemned America's destabilizing presence. The March incidents showed how fragile the situation was. Even a local rocket strike could reignite the cycle of retaliation and drag both sides back to the brink. On June 22, 2025, the U.S. launched Operation Midnight Hammer, a combined air and missile assault on Iran's 3 core nuclear sites, Fordow, Natanz, and Isfahan. Washington described it as a surgical downgrade to cripple Iran's centrifuges and send a clear signal that further progress toward a bomb would be stopped by force. Early reports from Tehran spoke of serious but contained damage, while U.S. sources called it a significant setback to Iran's capabilities. Within hours, the region was on high alert. Air defenses activated, communication channels jammed, and U.S. forces in the Gulf repositioned. The next day, June 23rd, Iran fired missiles at Al Udeid Air Base in Qatar, the biggest U.S. hub in the region. Most were intercepted. Some damaged infrastructure, but there were no casualties. Tehran framed it as a measured and lawful response, showing it could retaliate without crossing the line into total war. The Midnight Hammer, Al Udeid sequence, became a test of deterrence. The U.S. proved it could hit the heart of Iran's program, and Iran showed it could reach America's regional backbone. From here, the path splits, either de-escalation through mediators and rules of engagement, or a slide down the escalation ladder toward strikes on Gulf logistics and allied missile defense systems. One can only hope that the fragile truce between the U.S. and Iran holds. But history shows how easily things can spiral. The events of early 2020 and later the Camp Taji attacks proved that even a small spark in Iraq can trigger a new exchange of blows. The June 2025 chain, Midnight Hammer, and the Al Udeid strike made it even clearer. A hit on nuclear infrastructure leads straight to a hit on military bases. For now, both sides seem to prefer controlled escalation. There's still a window for diplomacy, but one miscalculation, one wrong read of damage reports or radar signals could send everything crashing down much faster than anyone expects. Gary was right. Here we explore how the world works and the key events that shape our reality. Subscribe so you don't miss videos that not only inspire, but also help you think bigger and act smarter.